My college draft is proud to announce our conference called Educate You. Educate You core areas will cover recruitment, retention, and how to build a strong alumni base of underrepresented and first-generation college students. I'm Lamont Thompson, and I'm the CEO of My College Draft. Our topic for today on My College Draft Educate You is titled 648, a rendition of or a spinoff of Dave Chappelle's 846. Now, let me preface this by saying we are not trying to erase or try to hide what is going on. We simply just want to be a litmus for change. So today's title is called 648. We will cover economics, political issues that face us as people of color. So today I want to introduce my panel. Panel, go ahead and introduce yourselves.
I am David Hartman.
Ricky Frierson.
And I'm Shaka Dimba.
The worst introductions ever. But nevertheless, what I want to do, and I want to jump in because this show has been kind of like burning inside me for a little while. So let's talk about what's going on in the news. Let's talk about the police knee on the neck of Mr. Floyd, how it's impacting our community in the midst of COVID. When you first saw that, what was going through you guys' mind? Shaka.
For me personally, like I guess when it first happened, I feel like I've seen something like this before. Like, you know, you start to just think about all the other times on social media. I saw on Twitter personally the first time I saw any of this. And so I'm just thinking like, man, like here we go again. I didn't know that it would like blow up the way it has. Like, thank goodness that, you know, people have used it for more. But to be honest with you, it wasn't like some crazy moment. It was just kind of like, man, I've seen this before, which is sad, but yeah.
David?
I actually was working, took a break, and was scrolling through my phone, and it popped up. I don't remember if it was on Instagram or what, but it popped up, and like I hardly ever really show emotion, but that one definitely jerked a couple tears from my eyes. So I mean, for me, my mind went a bunch of different places. Just initially, that it was I felt like it's gonna be the same old story again, and the way things are constantly portrayed. So just one, I want to see what the outcome is going to be of the whole situation. But that was my initial, and then just start thinking about my kids and family and so on.
So, Dr. Frierson, from a perspective of like your academic research, how did you approach it, man? I know it's one thing to look at it personal, but how'd you look at it?
Personally, I wasn't surprised. I haven't been surprised about any afflictions or oppressions that have come against minority folks since Rodney King in LA. When, you know, that was the first and last time I've ever been surprised of police violence towards African Americans and not having the tangible results that we were looking for. From a professional side, the question for me was more like, there's two questions. Number one, why did this become national? Outside of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, Breonna Taylor in Louisville, amongst numerous others, number one. Number two, how did this become nationally televised when there were, since August 5th, 27 incidences of video incidences of racial situations such as this, not necessarily leading to death, as in the case of George Floyd, but leading to racial bigotry, microaggressions, straight out hate speech. There's 27 videos, only 3 of them have made 4 of them have made national attention since August 5th. So, you know, those two things that I look at as far as with the scope of work that I have to do, what was it about this particular video that got people so agitated, and what was it about the video that made media pick it up and want to sensationalize it? Because one thing that after a while of getting the information, it just became a thing to just really pull on the emotions of everyone. And You know, from a standpoint of the Black community or the minority community, one thing that we've always have responded in kind to situations like this with Trayvon Martin, Philando Castile, who was also in Minnesota, Mike Brown in St. Louis, is the fact that we've always protested with little to no results, tangible results that we want to look at. But this one literally captivated the globe, right? So this is something unique as far as it being just the appointed time or the right time, unfortunately, for the life of George Floyd, but bringing awareness globally to the atrocities and the underlying current of racial oppression or racial injustices that continue to happen to minorities every day. And so I'm glad that our white colleagues, our majority of our white colleagues, quote unquote, finally got woke. But it also leads to that sentiment also lets you know how dire the situation is that these have always happened. These videos like this, as like what Shaka mentioned earlier, we're numb to it. We've seen it before. And so for our white colleagues and counterparts to just now be woke by this and triggered in such an emotional way, into which we've had, I think, probably one of the largest participation of white allies joining the protest movement that we've had since, I would say, the 60s and the civil rights eras of the 64 and 65. So there's a lot of different things that are negative, but there's a lot of hopeful things. Or I don't want to use hopeful. There's a lot of promising things. I try to remove the word hope from a category because hope is just a thought void of action. And so that's something that we've been prisoners of too long in the Black community, is having thoughts and having emotions void of action. And so we need to make sure we have sustainable action. So hopefully this is a promising situation and a platform that we have to capitalize and really make sure our voice and our narrative for change is heard throughout the nation.
You're tuned in to the Educate You podcast being brought to you by My College Draft. Again, I'm your host, Lamont. Shaka, so from your perspective, when you look at the protesters, man, there's been a lot of young faces in the crowd. Why is it that it's impacting you guys so much, you think?
I think for us, well, for one, I think as been mentioned, like it being such a national and global thing means that everyone's getting involved, right? So everyone feels the need to like participate. I just think in the era where social media is so important, like I feel like a lot of, especially for the younger generations, we get a lot of our news from social media. And so with social media, you also see like the outrage, right? So you're closer to like what the emotions are. So when you go out to your protests, you carry those same emotions, I think, with you to those protests. And also too, I think it's just a culmination of just what's happened. So like when the Mike Brown stuff happened and like Trayvon Martin, like I was just leaving high school, right? So this is like the first time me personally, I'm like thinking about these things like at that level. And so like throughout this time, you feel like nothing has changed. And so like, I think for people like, 25 to like 20, it's like, we've seen these 4 or 5 years and how like nothing's happened. Eventually you just like, I don't know, you want to do something about it, right? And so just being mad on Twitter isn't enough for people anymore. Like eventually you have to like take to the streets, you have to do something about it. And so I think a lot of people's frustration is coming out in this moment that's been building up over years. I think the social media effect has something to do with it. I think the fact that we're in a political cycle and a lot of younger people are already like paying attention to news anyways, just because like the times, a lot of like Bernie stuff, a lot of like people, are already in tune with news. I think it's just a lot of things going on. So I think with the COVID, people being inside all day, I know for my generation, like not being able to go out to the club and stuff, like we're in that age where like, people want to be out, And so there's a lot of things. I think it's just like the perfect storm of like 5, 6, 7 different scenarios, if that makes sense.
So David and Ricky as well, just growing up in urban environments, and how do you think that it's actually having what kind of direct correlation you guys think it's going to have on our urban communities? Is it going to incite more of a communal protest, or do you think it's going to unite the community, specifically in the urban areas?
It depends. I mean, we have 2 exhibits right now. We can see what kind of responses are going to be. We have the young man who was hung in Los Angeles over the weekend. African-American male, 24, and they, try to rule that case as a suicide. We don't know all the facts of that yet to see if that is an accurate assessment of that situation. We have a shooting in Atlanta. Then we've had a trickle of different videos of past shootings that have happened in which there was a wrongful death or a presumptive wrongful death. And so it's really a combination, kind of like what Shaka said, of a lot of different forces. Number one, what is the city going to do with past incidences? So what's the statute of limitations of malpractice or abuse of the law or the abuse of power based on police positions? Number two, the debate that's going on with defund the police. How is that being defined unilaterally and standard-wise? Also, how to improve the responses of situations going on when we have city council governing certain people and providing more resources and the aspect of human resources and things like that. So it depends on what's the reaction.
Mm-hmm. David?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. It depends, but for me, I just feel like it's the same movie playing over and over again. So unless there's some type of law changed or something written in black and white that's gonna be more in our favor, then I don't really think there's gonna be any change. We'll go through this period. There may be a little slight growth or move forward, but it'll just be the same thing over and over again.
And yeah, I think to jump onto that real quick, I think when you're looking at something systemic as racism is and as it is in this country, how prevalent it is in different systems, it can't be just one will to that mechanism. It has to be a coordination of different wills. So right now we're attacking the social justice will, but we have to also talk about economic inequality, the inequality of food resources, the inequality of sustainable development in some of these cities. And so in the long-lasting history and the policies and the laws, and looking at how policies and redlining and all these things have had long-term effects. And so if we're going to have any kind of substantive change, we need to have these battlefronts all coordinated at the same time. If we start trying to just do one battle at a time, it's not going to make enough change, because then it'll give the appeasement of change with with not a lot of sacrifice of the actual system. And so that's something that we have to do. And I mean, I tell the young folks over here and where I'm at in Colorado that, okay, you've had your chance to, you've marched, you feel good about yourself, you spoke out, you protested, whatever, wonderful. But everybody's done that. I mean, that is the repetitive answer to all these questions we've had. So the question really is, going off of what David said, you will continue to fail the test if you do not answer the question correctly. And so we've already done the protest, done that a few times. What is the sustainable changes? Because the real test of what we need to do to see if this change is going to be sustained is 6 months from now. What kind of conversation are we having? You see what I'm saying? 6 months from now, are we still on the police department's neck about funding? Are we still on the community's neck about proper resources, economic resources? I think I just saw on MSNBC or NBC News, one of the two channels, that the average wealth for a white household is $171,000, and the average wealth for a black household is $17,000. What are we doing to close that gap? Are we having any kind of talks about that? Are we having talks within our employments in HR? It's very well known nationally. You can offer a person of a minority status a lower wage for a job that they're qualified for, knowing that they have other forces that might make them have to go ahead and take that position when you would have offered someone else at least 20% more of that. So we have to look at all these things, and that's widely known in HR, that they have these metrics and looking at compensation analysis, but we don't address these things. And so until we're making the adequate amount of money for what we're worth in our skill sets, and until we are able to really develop our communities and not be threatened by white hate to destroy those communities, i.e. Tulsa, i.e. Chicago, i.e. New York, i.e. Rosewood, Florida. I mean, we can go on. Galveston. I mean, we can go on all these different places. And so until we're really able to be allocated the equitable resources, and then have the city and state principalities sustain and support those resources that we're developing in the Black community, will always be trying to push for equality.
But isn't that why like the education part of it is so important? Because I feel like with a lot of these like a lot of times when these things happen, people are so focused on like the one incident and like in a bubble, right? And I think this is the first time I've seen personally where people are actually talking about like white privilege as a whole. They're talking about systemic racism as a whole. And so I think that it's important for us to really push people to keep learning like outside of just like defund the police, right? Because like you said, they need to understand like the whole system and how everything works together. And so I think it's just really important that like me, I think about the media all the time because that's what I studied. I'm a filmmaker and all that. So for me personally, I get frustrated when I see like CNN or MSNBC or these places where I know thousands of people are watching and they only want to focus on that, but they don't have people on the show like Dr. Cornel West or whoever else to really talk about the whole system, right? Because I feel like it's a distraction when we talk about George Floyd only, or when we do this. It's a way to keep us focused on this so we don't see what's going on over here. And so I think it's really important for us, people with podcasts, any kind of media, to really get the message out like, look, everybody do their research and really look at like how this thing looks at a national scale.
That's why I always suggest to students, especially when they're in college and they're trying to have an informed decision, go beyond your local favorite channel, right? So if you like to watch Fox News, watch CNBC or something else that's going to differ so you can get a different opinion. But more importantly, watch an international news channel because they have no stake in American interests. So they're just going to tell you how it is. They're going to tell you what they found and they're going to give you an objective point of view without any kind of skew, because at the end of the day, news media is just like any other organization. It's a business. It's there to make money. So they need to put on TV what is going to be clickbait and what's going to have people watch constantly. And so if you think about it, it was the fear of the coronavirus and things like that. I'm not saying that it's not accurate what's going on with the coronavirus, but it was talking about that. But then it's amazing, in the midst of an unprecedented pandemic such as COVID, the very first issue that arises once people start to I guess go against social distancing practices is this racial construct in our nation. That's the very first incident that bubbles up to the top, is racial construct. So, in this year 2020 being vision, we need to look at how we are adequately, this is a year of America looking at itself in the mirror for real and having to understand that there's a lot of things we need to work on.
The other thing real quick, on the media part, like why part of the reason why I said this story just keeps repeating itself is because that's where the narrative is controlled, right? There's an incident that happens and then they change that narrative to something else to actually divert your focus on what's going on. Plus, they can continue to hide all this other stuff that's happening in the background. So, hey, look over here. Let me get your attention here so we can continue doing what we've been doing. So the story continues to repeat itself. So the incident happens. They're gonna try to tear down this man's character, which they've already done. Like the things just it happens the same way over and over and over and over again, regardless of what case you look at. It's the same pattern.
So for those who are tuning in for the first time, this is the Educate You podcast. The title of the show is 648, a spinoff of Dave Chappelle's 846. Again, we are not trying to erase in any way what has happened currently, but what we're trying to do is be a litmus for change. And so when I look at this thing, y'all, I looked at it from there's the marriage of the philosophy of Malcolm X and Martin. So that you see all the anger, and then you see and you were saying, Ricky, why is this particular case being highlighted over the other ones? When you mentioned the civil rights, I'm like, it wasn't until the invitation of our white counterparts that the world even cared, and they even knew that it was going on all this time. And so how do we take those philosophies, the Booker T, Du Bois, how do we take that and then start shifting to change? Like, how do we take all this anger, all this frustration, and start figuring out plans for like economics? Like, how do we really make Black economics work? Because everybody keeps talking about it, and there's a few people that win. But how do we spread the wealth a little bit better?
Are you asking me? Or are you asking?
Yes. We'll start with you first, Dr.
I think what I'm going to say is a little contentious. To make Black economic work, you have to make white people stop feeling threatened by Black success.
How do you do that?
So, you know, each time that we've had small startup communities that have been successful and thrived, white hate has come into the fold to destroy it, dismantle it. You think about even with Malcolm X, Booker T. Washington, Martin Luther King, W. Du Bois. There's anytime, it's amazing, you know, as we talk right now, the KKK is not considered a domestic terrorist, but Martin Luther King was by the CIA. As we talk right now, the KKK and the alt-right groups are not considered domestic terrorists, but Malcolm X was. And so we have to understand that. I think a part of it is that until the majority stops feeling threatened by minority success, and in this case, we're specifically talking African American or the Black community success, it'll be hard because the majority has access and the privilege of the law and policies being on their side. So one thing I tell white people and colleagues alike is this: you have to stop being reactive to minorities' emotions and be proactive to what you know is right. I'm not trying to have you think like me. I'm just trying to have you think rightly. And so until white colleagues stop trying to wait until something happens and then come ask us how we feel, where we're at, where do we stand, are you okay, is there something I can do? I wish everybody knows how Google works. You can Google all these incidences. You can Google and educate yourself on racial oppression and things that have happened. And then you have to find out why within yourself you're threatened by Black success. You have to figure out why I can be Dr. Frierson at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but then at 5:30 when I decide to go to the gym, all of a sudden I'm a potential thug. Why is that? Because of how I look? It doesn't match with my intelligence? What's the case? And so until we have our white colleagues who make up the minorities, Blacks make up 13% of this country. So you're talking about a well over 60% is white. And so until the majority takes ownership of where their weaknesses or their threats or their envy or whatever the case may be lies, it's very hard for those other successes of minorities communities to be propped up.
So Shaka, specifically you are up and coming entrepreneur, man. So when you look at it from your purview, like how do you foresee the future for someone that's up and coming in business, and how can you, and I hate to use it as this, but how do you take this opportunity to launch your platform?
Yeah, well, I can only speak from like my type of business. So me, I mean, I have a production company. Right? So that's like what we do is we tell stories. So I mean, there's a natural pathway for that. For us specifically, I know we've talked in our meetings about wanting to do like work more geared towards our local community. So like Kansas City, and really focusing on like how can we use a media company to impact our social our social constraints, or just how to impact our community and like, you know, push for change. But I think that can be applied to any business, right? So especially businesses in like minority communities, just using your like, you know, your building or your platform to really like push for change. So let's say there's a politician locally that really is like doing all the right things when it comes to defund the police, if you believe in that, or like whatever, right? Maybe you allow that person to use your building for an event, or, you know what I mean? Like, I think there's a lot of ways for people and their businesses to get involved and to be helpful in these times. I don't know specifically what you want me from that question, but.
No, I really wanted to hear your heart, man, because when I notice when most people start a business, it's hard, and it's one of the first step is always the hardest step to make. Yeah. And I just want to make sure that, you know, that you see a clear view or clear pathway to whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, right? But in this instance, when it comes to like all this protesting, it's always protesting, always protesting. And then when it ends, we go back to what life was before. And so
I feel like with this one though, I know you said not to use the word hope, so I'm trying to reprogram myself on the fly right here. But I have faith, or I think that there is a possibility for this to be different from the aspect of like when people protest, they go out there and they're mad. They say they want change, but they're never specific. Like, people don't have a list of demands, right? So it's really easy for people to just be like, all right, they're mad, but a week later, we'll be good. We just ride this out. You know, they'll have their little time or whatever. But I keep coming back to this, but I really do think with like Twitter and social media, people are able to see like when the NAACP puts out a list of like what they think should happen, or when your local politician says, I want this specific law, I want this, this, and this. And now people are able to like really latch on to like, you know what? I'm out here until every cop has body cameras, for example, right? And so I do think that maybe if we start pushing more towards that, we can actually see a difference. Like even with the NBA, right? So I'm a big NBA guy. Everybody in the league is talking about not going back down to Orlando until there's change. But the problem with that is, what does that mean? Are they waiting until like things are equal? So that means the NBA is just never going to happen again for 30 years. That's not something that can happen right now. So I really do think as we start to push towards specifics and what we want and demanding specifics and staying with the protest or with whatever until we get it, I don't think things will change until we start doing that. And I do think things are pushing towards that direction as people are really like sharing like things on Instagram or whatever. I don't know what you guys think about that. But
David, from a Black economics point of view, like what do you see ways of strengthening our economics, man?
I would say really controlling our dollars for population that only makes up 13%. We're the ones that spend the most money. So really trying to figure out ways to control our dollars and stop being consumers and start being owners. I know that's something that is scary when you start thinking about all of the places that have been built up, like your Black Wall Streets, and then are burned down and taken from you. But right now, I know people feel hopeless. That's part of the reason why they're willing to burn stuff and loot and everything else, because they feel like they don't own anything. They've built everything that we have, or their ancestors have built everything that we have. And it's the whole country has basically been built on the backs of Black people, and you don't own even a piece of that. So really start looking at, okay, how do we, if I don't have the money by myself, how do we pull money together and start building something and start owning something? Find a group of people who have like minds, who want to do the same thing, and start building stuff and owning stuff. And then once we do that, we also got to support each other, right? Like, I don't know what it is or why we do this, but for some reason, if we don't purchase it from the Louis Vuittons or the Gucci's or whomever, then we drop the value on it when it comes from a Black person. We need to also know what our worth is, and also be willing to invest in ourselves, right? So I would say that for me is a big thing.
Take that last thing, Dr. Frierson, take that, what he just said, us having a hard time being an investor ourselves. And a lot of times for me, I look at, you only invest in what you believe in. That's Warren Buffett's model. How do we take what David said academically and change that? Because this show is called 648 for a reason. And how do we change it academically?
Oh, I want to hear what Shaka, because Shaka got bubbled up by what David said. So I want to make sure I get my young man. My young cub. I want the young cub to come up here and speak on something real quick before I go in.
No, it's just funny because I had just had this conversation with someone the other day about like Black entrepreneurs come back to their community and they sell their product, how you want to charge your worth because you're worth that, whatever it is. But how can you justify charging your worth to your community when you know your community, maybe it's not in their price range? So let's say like, all right, not to like put this person out there, but I know somebody that has like a juice company, right, in Kansas City, right? And so his shakes and his juices are amazing. Like, it's quality. Like Smoothie King, hey, they should be watching their back because he's coming. But at the same time, like, it's quality smoothies, but they're expensive. And so his shops are in his community. They're in like, you know, the inner city and stuff like that. But who's in those shops? It's all white people. Because people in this community can't justify spending $14 on a shake. So it's like that balancing act of like, what do you do? I don't know. I just wondering what you guys think about that.
I think that leads me to my comment though. You know, there was a phenomenal lady. I wish I knew her name. She was on she's probably on YouTube. You guys can probably, you know, with the social media, YouTube, the World Star. And she was using an analogy of monopoly, and she pretty much was saying how the board has been built by slaves, but with no ownership. And so your question of how do we get to become, you said, imagine if you're going by the board and you built everything, but then you don't own nothing on any part of the board, but you built everything on the board, and then you don't own nothing. And now you're trying to go in there and start a business. How do you start a business when there's nothing for you to start a business on? Or kind of going with the Shaka saying is that the community is so downtrodden right now because of the centuries of this atrocity of slavery, that it's hard for the community to support at that type of price level. Because you know, that's one thing I would say is that when you see Black businesses, it is a catch-22 because they got to figure out how to make a profit to be a business and be operational. But at the same time, if you're trying to support your consumers, if your price point is at a point where it's too high, it's hard to do. So for me, I'm going right back to my original statement on how do we attack this economically. We have to attack it politically. We have to start getting people in. We have to pay attention to the midterm. We have to pay attention to stuff. And one thing I want to make very clear is we have to stop accepting just a Democrat Republican point of view. We have to start being independent in the way we think. There's going to be some things in which you might be more conservative about, and there's going to be some things where you might be more liberal about. However, what we've done, though, is we've been conditioned to just accept two bad choices. I mean, think about it. That's how we got Trump in presidency now. When you go back and look at that presidential narrative, no one was happy with Clinton nor Trump. I remember a lot of people was on the Bernie bandwagon, and when Clinton won and then the whole DNC things came out, people were upset, and that kind of put a fracture on it. And then no one was happy with Trump for sure. But everybody thought, this man's so crazy, there's no way in the world. But everybody was accepting two bad choices. Why can't we not as a country, why can't we not as a Black community say, that's a failed search? We need to start thinking independently. So there's going to be some things where I don't know if people saw, but there was I want to say it was Alabama, where there was people Republicans who ran as Democrats because they knew they would get the Black vote that way. And then when they won the seat, they switched over to party. And so we have to be mindful that I'm not pro-Republican and I'm not pro-Democrat. I'm trying to figure out what's the best way. So there's some Republicans that I like their ideology and I like what they're trying to do in the community. And there's some Democrats. I'm not going to automatically accept just because you say you're a Democrat that you mean you're for me. And just because you say you're a Republican means you're against me. We have to be really mindful on looking at the policies that our people are trying to implement and what's best for our community. And until we start doing that, we're going to be slow to economic change, because how you going to have economic, it's going to be, you can still attain it, but it's very hard to have economic prosperity in the midst of laws, policies that, think about it. Prime example, how many African Americans are locked up right now for selling weed? And then as soon as the weed industry became legal, 97% of them jokers is owned by Caucasians. How does that happen? You still have people serving life-term sentences because of the 3-strike you're out rule, selling weed. And now weed is legal in certain states. I'm in one of those states. And you have 90-something percent, well, in my state, 99.9% of the business is owned by white people. How does that happen? And so when we're talking about economic prosperity, you see people who are finding ways to do it, but it was considered illegal. And then once the systemic system finds a way to legalize it, they legalize it in a way in which policy says these certain people will never have access to it again, but we're going to steal their model and give it to other people to be successful.
Yeah.
So it's funny you said that. So again, you listening to the Educate You podcast. Today's title is 648, where we're dealing with change, not trying to erase what is taking place with the 846, the amount of time it took to kill Mr. George Floyd by the police officer. So I'm listening, and I'm telling you, this is where I'm at, fellas. And tell me what y'all think about this. I'm thinking like, let's start with all the Black Greeks. There's thousands and thousands of members individually in all the groups. If the the 9 organizations came together as far as like politics, because that's what we're on right now. Do you guys think, because in our organization, Alpha Phi Alpha, the coldest organization ever, I know you don't, Ricky, but I'm saying, if we do you think do you think that if all 9 organizations came together politically, because we all have voters registration, all that good stuff, if we came together, that we can possibly sway a vote?
No.
Just on Greek life. Tell me why.
The issue isn't
Go ahead, Shaka, and then Ricky.
We're talking about politics, because I followed this one very closely, because I knew there was no way that Joe Biden was going to come all the way back and win. But what happened in South Carolina? Mr. Clyburn, I forget his first name, all respect to that man, but he sold out black people to Joe Biden, and he won 80% of the black vote. I don't care what you think about Bernie, whatever. There's no way you could tell me that he's 80% better in terms of policy than Bernie, right? And so it's the same thing with like the Divine Nine. It all comes down to like leadership. People are selling out the vote for whatever reason and not looking at the policies. They're selling out to like a party, like they're Democrat or Republican. He represents the establishment democratically, or Democratic establishment. We're gonna go support that guy. People aren't looking at the issues, so I have no faith that like the Divine Nine coming together is gonna make that any different. I think what it comes down to is there systemic issues that need systemic answers. In terms of like politics and people voting, people vote based on what they see on MSNBC. So no matter what the Divine Nine says, people are gonna vote based on what the media tells them to vote. It always happens that way.
Dave, I got another twist on that same question with you, but Dr. Frierson, what you said?
I don't think it'll work, because we're short-sighted on the MPHC actually represents black people who have had privilege to go to college, and does not represent the majority of the communities that are downtrodden and underserved, who have not had the chance or afforded the opportunity to go to college, number one. Number two, who are probably prisoners of the social justice, or not social justice, but the social services and the criminal justice system. And so what you will have is a division in ranks for 3 different reasons. Number one, generational identity, as what Shaka just said. You have new millennials who have a different thought process of how the country should be ran than Gen Xers or Gen Zers. Number two, the money construct of we were afforded the position to be here. And then number three, when you try to bring in 9 different entities, somebody's going to want to say they had the claim of being the first to do something, right? And so you think about because if that was the case, why do we have 9 different frats and sororities if we are all about unifying the community and being black success? Because we all have ultimately the same aim of what? Black matriculation through higher education, black success through the community, etc. But if that was the case, and we were all having the same unified goal, why are we separating factions and stuff like that? Because at the end of the day, what happens is someone has a certain thought and it becomes a faction of why we should do it this way, and people agree with that versus a different way. And so we have to come together in those aspects first, and we have to recognize that we need not the NPHC, we really need a conglomerate of people who represent all facets of success and non-success in our community, so that we can understand how does our policy affect crime-ridden communities, or families with low socioeconomic status? How does policy affect those who are trying to become emerging professionals in some of these needed industries, etc.? And until we have that nice conglomerate of people, so I don't want to say necessarily Divine Nine, but a nice mixture that represents the totality of experiences of Black community in America, I think you will have a better chance of success.
And that's the thing, Dr. Frierson, because that was the original philosophies of our organizations. And when you said why is it the 9, I started thinking in terms of why there's so many, and that's this whole nother subject matter, but why is there so many denominations? It's the same thing. It's the same thing. David, when I said that, you said no too?
So what? The question. I'm staying out of that. I can't participate in that.
I knew he was gonna be a hater. That's why I brought that up. But look, this is where I'm at.
a question.
Go ahead, brother Shock.
Do you think people actually even know anything about like the Divine Nine, like in the Black community outside of people that went to college? Because look, when I ask you about it, when I talk about it, people don't know about it. They don't care about it. It's not a thing. And a lot of people's like.
This is why I brought this question up, because historically, the Divine Nine has always marched. We got behind financially the civil rights. This is why I brought that up, because now as you said, Ricky, so it's so many layers, but it wasn't always that way. And so I just took the organizations, but that's the same view of our communities. You have so many different layers, and so that's one of my reasons for even bringing the subject matter of economics and politics, because it's going to be so many different schools of thought. How we ever going now? We let it get away from us so bad and so long that it's going to be hard for the dollar to even change hands in our community, and let alone get the right candidates into politics. So that's why I'm saying, how do we fix it? I mean, it's a kind of like a utopian type philosophy, but can we even change? Can we even fix the amount of times that the Black economic dollar changes hands, let alone put the right candidates in office? Because once we think we got them in office, like you said, Ricky, they switch over. Not only do they switch over the politics, but they switch over their philosophy. It becomes somebody totally different.
They don't really switch in. If you really do your homework, they are who they always have been. It's just that people don't do their homework. So you can definitely control that.
That's like when the dude dates the woman for that first time. He who he is until he get what he want.
Okay, but no, it's like if you date the woman for the first time, but before you went on the date, somebody sent you a text message of everything that you don't like about that person, but you decided to ignore the text message and went on the date anyways. That's what that's like.
And there you go. There you have it.
It's on the internet. You can literally do a Google search and look at somebody's complete loading record. It takes 5 seconds. Just saying.
I think yeah, you have to do your work. You have to do your research, and you have to understand the candidates and the politics and where they stand. And you know, that should be a diligent process in which you spend a couple hours, you know, in a month to just research the different candidates and understand your local principality and what's going on. On the college context, you know, how do you change these things? You know, 80% of our Black professionals come from HBCUs, and HBCUs get next to nothing financially from their states. And it would be, you know, I love the brother who, I think his name is Mike Davis, who he's going to go to a HBCU. He's a blue chip basketball player, and he's going to an HBCU program just, you know, to bring the dollar. But think about all the college athletes. If they went to HBCUs, it's a wrap. It's a wrap. Because you ain't about to go to you name the institution. Think about it. Ain't nobody purposely trying to go to Alabama just to go to Alabama. They're going because there's a program there. They can provide scholarships. There's a good brand, stuff like that. But if you go back and look in the early 70s and 70s and early 80s, you'll see that a good talent comes from HBCUs. And so until we support the HBCUs a little bit better than what we did, and for those who do the research on me, I'll be hypocrite if I said I went to a HBCU, but I understand the significance and importance of it. But the other thing about it is that we're so geographically restricted on where we're at. So it depends on where you're at. If I'm in a rural place like Colorado or Wyoming or Utah, it's going to be a lot harder to make changes versus where if I'm in Florida or Georgia, where the states are minority majority kind of things, like Texas. You see what I'm saying? So it depends on your geographic location too, on how much you can institute change and be that change that you want to see as well. So I don't know if I answered your question directly, but it's a tough thing, and I think it will definitely take more than just this one episode to really break down by pieces, fragmented understanding of how systemic the system really is.
David, do you think? Because you're right, Ricky. It's gonna take multiple episodes, man. Because this has been a historical issue for a while, but it helps me to understand the framework of people's thoughts. Like, what do you think about all the time? I know you in particular, very astute in a lot of things that impact us. And David is a visionary, and so I'm curious to see if you can even see the change even ever happening.
said before, unless something changed in black and white, no. I mean, that's at the core of it. That's what how this whole thing is set up. So, I mean, even if you think about why is it so much harder for a black person to get a business loan, right? You can get all the loans you want that'll put you in debt. College, home, car, everything that they put you in debt, you can get those. But when it comes to trying to get a business loan to actually be a part of the society and be able to do stuff, like we were talking about earlier, trying to build those communities is that much harder for us, right? That system wasn't built for you. It was you built everything, but it wasn't built for you. The educational system wasn't built for you. Like everything, as far as the system goes, it wasn't built for you.
So, Shock, in 30 seconds, man, because I know that this is your your industry, man. Like you are basically being in media, become our, in a sense, like our eyeglasses. You almost paint a picture on what we're gonna see. How would you spin this in a way where we can come out of this positive?
I would say just like in terms of media companies, just like devoting the time to educate people, not like with like biased perspectives, just giving them facts. Just like, look, this is the percentages of this and this, like police brutality, like look at like these numbers, or when it comes to like business loans, these are numbers. And just use your social media platforms for like getting out words, messages, you know what I mean? Just devote some of your business resources, some of your production resources to spreading good messages and to doing things locally. Like if you have a company, like a business company, a media company in Colorado, per se, talk about politicians in Colorado, talk about issues locally in Colorado. For us, I know we're going to start focusing on Kansas City. What are things we can reach out and communicate messages to people in Kansas City? I think it's your duty, honestly.
So 30 seconds apiece, fellas. We're about to close this on out. And again, this has been the Educate You podcast, brought to you by Mock College Draft, where education is the new money. 30 seconds. So you have a young mind coming out of college for the first time, and they bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. They want to make change. I need some type of 30-second inspiration for that type of person that look like us, talk like us, from where we from.
Like, what do you tell them, or what?
Yeah,
I would say it's incumbent on us and the young folks nowadays to not allow emotions to sabotage the platform to change the narrative that you're trying to give to the rest of the nation. And so the narrative needs to be focused on not what you're fighting for, but why you're fighting for it. Because quite frankly, people just don't understand. When they hear defund the police, they see what the message is. They don't understand why the message is, though, or they see what the protest is. They don't understand why the protest. And if you allow narratives such as those coming from our highest office in the lands to deter, distract, as what Shaka said, making it about something that is not the case. So when you think about Colin Kaepernick and the whole protesting and stuff like that, all of a sudden the narrative became it's about the flag, and it's never been about the flag. So making sure that we understand that when we're communicating for change, we need not only talk about what the change is, but more importantly, why the change is and why we're doing what we're doing. I think if you can explain that and be willing to be open-minded and listen, you'll be all right.
I would say just as much as we have people on the front lines, you need people behind the scenes. So this is a time, especially for the younger ones, to start building themselves up so they can be behind the scenes and we can start making some real change. The other thing is don't always show what's in your hand, because the more information that you put out and say, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, your opposition is watching that too. And they're going to make sure there's barriers that you won't be able to get to those goals. So I would say those.
I like that.
For sure. I was going to say, just for me, like, being someone that just came out of college recently, like, just listen. I know it's like, for us, people younger than me too, it's really easy to, like, have your ideas and, like, want to go out there and, like, I'm going to make something happen, whatever. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But I think a lot of times, younger people specifically, sometimes you just gotta like listen. You gotta talk to people, talk to new people. That's why I was happy to be on here, to just talk to people like older than me or people with different ideas, because the more ideas that get communicated, I think the better the results. And so I think you need to really like just let it be a melting pot. Like take something from here, take something from there. And then also too, don't be quiet. Like when you have ideas, speak on it. Even if they're the wrong ideas, you'll never know it's the wrong idea if you never talk to anyone about it. Like you need to find people you're comfortable with and communicate and learn. That's the biggest thing.
Like that. So again, this has been the Educate You podcast. 648 is in the books. I've been your host, Lamont Thompson. It's been my pleasure. Again, education is the new money. Get some.
There ain't no farther to try. The strong survive. These hurdles I'm facing are just life, but